They hate.
They hate.
They hate.
They hate.
They hate because they fear.
They hate because they fear.
Because they fear.
Because they fear.
And they fear because they feel that the deepest feelings of their lives
They're being assaulted and outraged. They do not know why.
They are powerless pawns.
Powerless pawns.
They are powerless pawns
in a blind play of social forces.
Richard Wright.
In the video, I'm running naked down the street, screaming for help. My girlfriend Jo chasing me in her car, shouting out the window for me to
stop.
See, there, my bare feet have left a clear trail in the snow for her to follow. This is both a dream and reality. In the dream, Jo's a vampire, a very hungry vampire, and I'm her quarry. It's a fancy word for victim. It's daytime, and my fear is enhanced by her ability to fly after me without burning or melting or, exploding. In reality, I'm in the midst of what Jo clinically refers to as an episode. She's chasing me to save my life, to return me safely to our bed, where I won't die from exposure. She's sweet like that. From Mau House Productions, a blind play of social forces. Episode 15, Sleepwalker X. When she does catch me, she's supposed to gently lead me to the car. Attempting to wake me suddenly by shaking me could result in an injury. More than likely an injury to me, because, as she has said many, many times, she's not going to
fucking sit there and let you hit me just to boost ratings, Wes.
She's very practical. Oh, the ratings Jo is talking about are Nielsen ratings. As in TV families. As in, I'm on TV. American reality television. The Art Channel. I'll be on at 8 p.m. on Thursdays, right before Fire Screamers, which is pretty much the best time slot.
This week on Fire Screamers, we lower a family of 4 into one of the hottest volcanoes in Hawaii. Will it bring them closer together or send them screaming for help? Either way, you're gonna lava it. Fire Screamers, Thursday at 9 p.m. on the Art Network. So awesome, it burns.
If you haven't heard of Art, that's because it's an up-and-coming network. You can also watch on the internet, which is where all people will be watching TV in the future. That's according to Art's head of programming, Derek Nikitas. That guy invented internet television, which he calls streaming. That's what he says anyway. I didn't even own a TV until all this started. The show is called Sleepwalker X. The X is supposed to stand for extreme. That's because I suffer from REM behavior disorder. As the promos for the show say, I sleepwalk to the extreme. I thought I had to be the only person in the world who could cook and eat a full meal while I was asleep. It's not even close to true. I was in New York a few years ago, and I went to see this off-Broadway show, Sleepwalk with Me. The guy who wrote and stars in it, Mike Birbiglia, built a career around his sleep disorder. The guy almost died after jumping through a second-story window. And now he's in his own movie. That's not how I got my show. I've never even met Mike Birbiglia. But after we saw his performance, Joe told me I'd better go see a doctor before I ended up jumping out of a window.
Or I end up jumping out of a window.
At that point, Joe and I had been living together for about a year or so, and I'd already tried to strangle her, have anal sex with her, and give her a bath. It was in the opposite order, though, so she thought it was fun at first. She never took off, though, even after I went to the doctor. So I know she loves me. She jokes and says,
"If I leave you, I'll end up feeling guilty when you have a suicide dream."
I'm glad Joe has a good sense of humor. I say even after I went to the doctor, because my doctor is actually the reason I ended up with my own show. Dr. Caroline Nikitas is board certified in sleep medicine. She's also the wife of Derek. Joe called the whole thing a scam and...
A conflict of interest in the least.
Look, this is serious money. Besides, after the first season, she'll treat me for free.
Who? Dr. Caligari?
Dr. Nikitas. Joe wasn't sold.
If I wanted you to get help for my sake, I would have dumped you when you choked me.
I told her I would get help and I could be famous too. She agreed to take a meeting with Derek.
When we last checked in with Dr. Strong, he had pulled off his greatest prank yet. He burned an image of Yosemite Sam into someone's colon. He's the rootinest, and they're the tootinest. And we caught it all. Malpractice. Wednesdays at 9 on the Art Network. If you don't like it, sue us.
The whole setup is genius. I'll admit I was a little confused when he explained it.
You'll wear a GoPro, one of those little cameras for your head. We'll have sensors set up in the house, so when you get up, it will start recording.
He said they'd also have a small crew working out of a mobile unit on the street.
And the best director out there.
They'd also be alerted when the sensors picked up my movement. There'd be a live feed for subscribers, but the actual show would be fully produced and edited.
So, these people will be in my house?
No, just cameras. The people are for when Wesley goes outside.
So America will be in my house every night?
Derek slid a piece of paper across the table. I picked it up and showed it to Joe.
I feel like I'm buying a ridiculously expensive car.
You could buy two.
Joe worked out the details of the contract. She works at a law firm, and she wanted to make sure that there were no loopholes for them to get out of treating my disorder.
Instead of just exploiting it.
Her boss said it seemed fair, to which she replied,
He's not a very good lawyer.
Still, I got the show. They decked out our house with sensors and not very hidden cameras, and they even bought us some new furniture.
For production value.
Chris, the director, said. I had a GoPro that I wore to sleep and one that I kept on my bedside table in case the first one didn't work. I wasn't sure how I was supposed to change it while I was sleeping, but I did change a tire asleep once, so I didn't ask.
We're down to the final four, and this next battle's gonna have you asking, are you tougher than a 5th grader? 10-year-old Hunter McGee is squaring off against 11-year-old Fisher Lawrence. Who will rule the playground, and who will get sent to detention? Kid Fight, Fridays at 8, only on the Art Network.
When I was a kid, my dad had this trick he'd do when I had the hiccups. He'd tell me that if I hiccuped one more time, he'd give me all the money in his wallet. And like magic, I'd stop. He'd show me a 20 or a 50, and I would try so hard to work up one more. Nothing. Nada. For 1 week after production of Sleepwalker X was supposed to begin, I couldn't sleep. And when I did, I didn't dream, or at least I don't remember any of them, and I certainly didn't sleepwalk. I was so nervous that I had somehow been cured by the promise of money. But Joe assured me that according to the contract we'd signed, they had to pay me anyway. She probably wishes she hadn't told me that, because the next night, I had my first episode. Episode. Just, you get it. We'd gone to see some airplane movie with Denzel Washington. And that night, I dreamt I was a pilot. The camera started rolling when I sat up. There was one high-angle camera mounted right above the door, and of course the West Cam on my head. I walked into the plane and took my seat in the cockpit at the end of the bed. I was drunk, but the real problem was that I didn't know how to fly the plane. The stewardess kept yelling at me. And when I turned back to tell them I was sorry, I was face to face with Joe. In the dream, she was the head flight attendant. On the dailies that I got to see, she was the irritated, bleary-eyed girlfriend with her arms crossed, shaking her head. Then she rubbed my shoulders to wake me up. At our meeting with Chris and Derek, Joe got reprimanded.
It was a touching scene, for sure, but the show is really about how Wes navigates the world in his sleep.
Which he can't do if you wake him up.
With the help of Dr. Nikitas, Derek and Chris made some suggestions to enhance my dreaming experience. They were more than suggestions. We now own the biggest television I've ever seen in my whole life. It's like something out of a sci-fi movie. Also, they put me on a diet of late-night viewing. Horror, fantasy, sci-fi, all the good stuff. Between that and the ice cream and the bourbon, I was set for some ratings-boosting somnambulating. That's Dr. Nikitas' fancy word for sleepwalking. Just in case, as an added precaution, Dr. Nikitas also prescribed a low dose of Ambien. The few paid subscribers would get quite a treat after that. I did some major damage to the living room floor when I tried to dig a grave in it. I had to, though. The secret organization had killed my family, and the only way they would let me live was if I dug a mass grave for all of them. I basically had no choice. When the assistant director saw Joe trying to stop me, he had to send in a crew to intervene. They promised to replace the floor when principal shooting was over. They'd even let her pick out whatever hardwood she wanted. She said,
I want that floor.
She wanted the floor that had the gouges in it. And then she had them sign an addendum to the contract that they would replace it with an identical floor. They would also have to replace the light fixture that I had to climb up to escape the snakes, and the mirror that I broke to kill the woman living in it. She was really nasty.
If you thought last week's episode of Schizo was awesome,
you're gonna freak out over this week's episode.
Julie has been off her meds for 2 months now.
And the voices in her head have her plotting to blow up a Spirit Airlines flight.
And our crew caught every second. Catch Schizo, Wednesdays at 10 p.m.
It's not exploitation.
It's the Art Network.
The show is supposed to be 42 minutes plus commercials and credits. My episodes don't always fit that time frame, especially since half the time it just looks like I'm wandering around. So they cut in with interviews and backstory. In one of the interviews, I told them about the first time I remember sleepwalking. I'd almost drowned. I was a kid, and we'd been living in this gated community with a pool and tennis courts. Our house was right by the pool. I'd been dreaming that I was an Olympic swimmer. I think the Summer Olympics were on that year. And I needed to practice to beat my arch rival, this merman from Australia. He had the advantage of a tail, but I could hold my breath forever. I guess maybe he could hold his breath forever too. But that wasn't part of the dream. Anyway, I put on my official Olympic suit, which was just a pair of my little sister's underpants, and walked barefoot down to the pool. I don't know how many laps I swam, maybe not even one, before I inhaled a lungful of water. That'll wake anybody up. Only I was swimming at the bottom of the pool, and it was pitch black out. So when I woke up, I panicked and swam into the side of the pool. My mom had said she could sense that I was in trouble, but I think she must have just heard the back door slam. Anyway, she dove in and pulled me out. Chris said it was a great story, and they even tried to film a reenactment of it.
But the kid actor they hired never could get the drowning right, so we scrapped it.
Less than a month in, Derek called us in for a meeting. By that time, Joe was sleeping in the guest room with a white noise machine. She said,
I just can't stand to see what you're doing to yourself.
The test audience doesn't connect with Josephine. They just don't find you to be likable.
I'm barely in any of the shots. How can they not
That's another problem. You signed a performance contract. I don't want to have to point out the obvious, but you're in breach of your contract.
I'll have my lawyer take another look at it.
That won't be necessary. Reality TV isn't real. I mean, it's real. You're a real person, Wesley, but if it were real, we'd be showing you going to the bathroom and buttering your toast. Snoozeville, right?
I swear I could feel the heat coming off of Joe's face as she stared at Derek. He picked up his phone and asked his secretary to send in someone named Rita.
Wes, I'd like you to meet Joe 2.0.
I believe Joe's exact words were,
No fucking way.
As I tentatively shook Rita Joe's hand, Derek tried to calm down Joe, by explaining that she could continue as she was, sleeping in the guest room, staying invisible, and avoid breaking her contract by allowing Rita to play her.
She's a model.
Aw, thank you.
Will Rita...
Joe 2.0.
Will she have to live with us?
Only at night.
So she'll sleep with my boyfriend?
Just until his performance.
After my performance, Rita would be officially off the clock until the next night. I could see the validity of both sides. Rita would only be in the house for 2 or 3 hours a night, and we wouldn't be having sex or anything. But this was a younger, more attractive, in the conventional sense, woman than Joe.
We lose some footage, sure, but everything's digital nowadays anyway, and with some expert editing, we could salvage a lot. Consider the last 2 weeks' rehearsal.
He dismissed Rita and asked us, well, he mostly asked Joe.
Do you realize how important this show could be to the sleep-disabled citizens of our country?
Wesley's just your average dude with a super hot girlfriend. But when he sleeps, he transforms into a superhero, an Olympic athlete, and a vampire slayer. He is Sleepwalker X.
Thursdays at 8 p.m. on the Art Network.
Sleepwalking to the extreme.
The first night she woke up to me tearing the bedspread into bandages for my head wound, Rita looked more excited than surprised. My parachute had opened at the last minute, but I'd hit the ground with such velocity that I thought I'd split my skull open. Luckily, the parachute would make for the perfect tourniquet. As I watched the footage, I could see how Rita made a better Joe than Joe. As Chris put it,
she's the eyes of America, and unlike Joe 0.0, America isn't going to be annoyed when you're doing your thing.
Rita didn't hear me get up during the vampire dream. She didn't hear me strip naked to get the scent of cologne off or to rub garlic on my chest and neck. She didn't hear me leave. Joe did, though. Dr. Nikitas has told us that loud noises are preferable to shaking, so Joe is just laying on the horn, despite the fact that it's after 2 a.m. About 5 blocks from our house, I finally hear the dying whine of her Honda's horn. I'm standing in the middle of the intersection, looking down at my red feet and shrunken. I immediately began to shiver, like a child who doesn't feel pain until he sees the scratch. To my left is Joe's Honda. Joe leaning across the passenger seat, yelling for me to
get the fuck in the goddamn car!
Her car hadn't had the chance to warm up, and the cool air blowing out of the vents forces me into a ball, my knees all pulled up tight to my chest. And then the art van pulls up beside us, and Chris is yelling for Joe to
stay put.
The van door opens, and out comes Rita in a nightgown I've never seen, and that is way too skimpy for this weather. As my chattering teeth vibrate my head like a tuning fork, Chris is telling Joe that she needs to
get in the van and let Rita drive him home.
Joe turns to me and says,
I am doing this for you.
In a way that tells me that this is the last thing she's going to be doing for me for a while. I just want to get home and get my clothes on, so I nod my head energetically as Joe pushes past Rita. And Rita whispers,
sorry,
as she puts her hands around my head and pulls me in for a kiss. The GoPro hits her in the forehead, so she takes it off. Behind her, I can see Al, one of the camera guys, focusing in on us. Rita rubs my freezing thigh and says,
Oh, we have to get you home, love.
Joe backs herself into the van, shaking her head slowly.
Things really heated up when Reverend Elijah Trueblood broke out the rattlesnakes. But what's going down when Madame Erotic shows off her Princess Albertina? It's a battle of heaven and hell on every episode of Pentecostals and Prostitutes. Sunday at 7, only on Art.
Joe doesn't sleep at the house. She tells me she'll be packing up her stuff and moving in with a friend from the office. Do I know her? I ask.
Do you know Rita?
I want to tell her to stay, to convince her that one day we'll look back on this experience and have all kinds of terrific stories to tell at parties, maybe even Hollywood parties. I almost tell her that Rita means nothing to me, but that just makes it sound like I was cheating on her, which I wasn't.
Call me when this is all over. I can't promise I'll pick up. I have a lot of processing to do. And I'm not sure I could be with someone whose values are so screwed up.
I just wanted a better life for us, an adventurous life. I wanted to be able to use my disability to pay Joe back for putting up with me. Now, maybe I still can. Maybe when the show airs and Dr. Nikitas treats me, I can use my Sleepwalker X money to pay for Joe to go to law school. And she'll move back in, and she won't have to worry about me wandering off or breaking stuff. We can get married and use the money from the show to go on a super relaxing honeymoon somewhere with palm trees. I'm lying in bed alone thinking about that when I get a text from Chris.
Derek is already talking season 2. You're beautiful, baby.
Joe never called me baby.
On the next Bait and Tackle, Jace thinks he's home alone with his adult VR headset. But what he doesn't know is that star NFL tackle Brent Willis is waiting in the wings. From master date to quarterback crunch, Jace won't know what hit him. Bait and Tackle, Tuesdays at 8, only on the Art Network.
Sleepwalker X was written and directed by Michael Mao and stars Michael Mao as Wesley, Elizabeth Pan as Joe, Rich Greene as Derek Nikitas, Elliott Dixon as Chris, the director, and Hannah Dorph as Rita. Additional voices for the Art Network commercials provided by Juan Pablo Suarez, Christa Burton, Matt Hudgens, and Evan Judway. The theme music was composed by Trevor Tremaine. Additional music for this episode by MusicLFiles. Caffeine Creek Band, QubeSounds, Edvard Grieg, Mykola Sosin, Toma Mutiu, Zakhar, Valaha, Nick Valerson, and DayFox. Geneva Hicks created the podcast cover art. Additional sound effects, courtesy of Pixabay. Writer, comedian, and actor Nina Dicker helped produce this episode. Look for her memoir, Tangerine Vagina, where finer books are sold. Special thanks to assistant casting director Annie Weaver. You can find out more about our cast and crew at ablindplaypodcast.com or on Instagram at Mauhouse Productions. Next week on A Blind Play of Social Forces, Episode 16, Marlboros, the King, and 8 o'clock Bean.
Jolene stared intently at Lavinia's chest to see if she noticed any movement in Lavinia. She was dead. She'd keeled over right there, right next to Jolene. Jolene hadn't said 3 words to the woman in 10 years, and here she was, dead.
And I've been her neighbor all this time. What kind of neighbor am I? Horrible neighbor. Breathe, Lavinia. Just breathe, damn it. One breath, that's all. You're not dead. You're not. You're just sleeping on me.
Hey there, Miss Jolene.
Hardy Garrett's salutation scared Jolene so much that she bit right through the filter of her cigarette, the ember of which dropped into her lap. She leaped up and dropped back down into her chair. The brittle chair collapsed.
Until then. If you aren't already, please follow the show. Your podcast app should have a follow button. Click it. And please rate and review. Ratings and reviews are the lifeblood of podcasts, and they take so little time. Just click those 5 stars. Tell us about your favorite episode. Share with friends and family. And thank you for listening.